My English teacher weaponized my Tourette's with malicious tricks, gaslit my family, and turned my school against me, so I exposed her systematic cruelty and ruined her career in the most devastating way possible. I was in 9th grade when Ms. Taylor first told me, "You'll never amount to anything." She was my English teacher, and she loved to use my Tourette's to make me feel like an outsider. I was first diagnosed at 10, and up to that point had spent my whole childhood trying to keep my diagnosis hidden so I could feel like a normal kid with friends. I'd always done a good job at it, but when high school started, my mom forced me to tell all my teachers in case there was an emergency. That was how it started. Other teachers didn't mind, but when I told Ms. Taylor, she burst out laughing. "Want my advice, kid? You should focus less on following trends and more on studying." I stared at her blankly. She continued, "Welcome to the real world. Not everyone's gonna give an F about your quirks." I felt my face burning up with embarrassment, so I just nodded my head until she finally stopped talking. I went home that day crying my eyes out, and my mom held me. She promised to go to school administration and have her fired. The next morning, we sat in front of the principal and explained everything. He had a white beard, beady eyes, and a Nokia phone. When we were finished, he started banging his fist on the desk. "You really expect me to get mad over this?" he exclaimed while laughing like a pig. "Get the F out of my office. You need to learn to grow a pair." And maybe if my mom could afford a lawyer, we would have been able to sue, but we couldn't. So instead, I lied to her. I went home that day and told my mom that Ms. Taylor had a change of heart, and my mom pretended to believe me. It was easier that way, because the truth is, English became my least favorite class of all time. Ms. Taylor took every opportunity to scrutinize me. If my shoulder jerked during a test, she'd stare at me and say, "Stop embarrassing yourself." If I made a clicking sound while she was in the middle of teaching, she'd completely stop the lesson and bury her face in her hands for 5 minutes straight. And, unlike autism, tics are almost impossible to mask. As soon as I get the urge to do something like bark like a dog, I feel a painful knot in my stomach getting tighter and tighter like a rope around my neck. But because of Ms. Taylor, I started suppressing harder than I ever had before. By the end of each day, my whole body ached from holding everything in. I couldn't even sit through a class without collapsing onto the desk and falling asleep. I just wanted to prove that I was strong. Then, one day, things went completely sideways. It was the middle of a test, and I'd spent the last 20 minutes desperately trying to suppress a tic that felt like a firecracker building in my chest. My whole body was shaking, sweat dripping down my forehead, and I was gripping the edge of my desk like it was the only thing keeping me alive. Ms. Taylor noticed immediately. She stood up and marched over, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. She bent down, leaned in way too close, and whispered just loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is exactly why you'll never amount to anything." That was it, I snapped. Before I even realized what was happening, my tic erupted, loud and uncontrollable. "Fuck, fuck, butch, butch, woof, woof, fuck!" Kids around me either burst into laughter or stared in shock, their eyes wide with secondhand embarrassment. But to my surprise, Ms. Taylor didn't yell at me. In fact, she didn't say anything. She took out a pair of headphones from behind her desk, gesturing for me to play the sensory music that helps me regulate. Something felt off, but I just wanted my tics to end. But the second I put them on, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake, because what played wasn't the steady rhythms I needed. It was chaos, sudden shrieking noises and irregular beats. It felt like someone was scraping my bones with their nails. My body reacted instantly. Every tic I'd been suppressing exploded out at once. My arms jerked violently, and my head snapped back, and these loud vocal tics I'd never even had before ripped out of my throat. I tried to pull the earbuds out, but my hands were jerking too badly to grab them. The class was completely silent in shock, except for Ms. Taylor, who was laughing and shrieking about how good my performance was. The rest of the day was a blur, and next thing I knew, I was waking up in the hospital surrounded by nurses. Turns out, I had banged my skull against the wall so hard that I had given myself a concussion. I woke up to my mom in tears. She told me that Ms. Taylor admitted to playing sounds specifically designed to trigger tics, because she wanted to prove it was something I could get over. And while I reassured my mom that I was okay, rage boiled my blood. I knew I had to make Ms. Taylor pay. My phone buzzed on the hospital bed beside me. Maya had texted 17 times while I was unconscious. I scrolled through her messages with shaking hands, each one more frantic than the last. The final one made my stomach drop. "Check Facebook now." Mom stepped out to grab coffee from the cafeteria, giving me the privacy I needed. I opened Facebook and searched for Ms. Taylor's profile. There it was, posted 2 hours ago. "Praying for my troubled students tonight. Sometimes those who need the most help resist it the hardest. Please keep JM in your thoughts as they recover from today's incident. Mental health matters." My initials. She'd used my actual initials. The comments underneath made me want to throw my phone across the room. Parents praising her dedication. Other teachers calling her an inspiration. One comment from the PTA president about how lucky we were to have such a caring educator. I took a screenshot before my hands could shake too badly. Then I opened Instagram and found her account. My fingers hovered over the message button. This was stupid. I should wait for mom. But the rage burning in my chest wouldn't let me stop. I typed quickly. "We both know what you did." The typing bubbles appeared immediately, then disappeared, appeared again. This went on for 3 minutes before her response finally came through. "I'm concerned about your emotional state right now. This kind of paranoid thinking is exactly why I tried to help you overcome your condition. Perhaps you should focus on healing instead of making wild accusations." My head throbbed where I'd hit the wall. The nurse came in to check my vitals, and I quickly locked my phone. She adjusted something on my IV, and suddenly the room felt fuzzy around the edges. Mom returned with her coffee just as the sedatives kicked in. She found me agitated, my hands clenched around my phone. I tried to explain about the Facebook post, about the messages, but my words came out slurred and confused. Mom's face creased with worry. She called for the nurse, who increased the medication. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was a new text notification from Ms. Taylor. "Your mom thinks you're having an episode." Perfect. I woke up to Maya's face inches from mine. The room was dark except for the glow of the heart monitor. She pressed a finger to her lips and showed me her phone. 11:47 p.m. Visiting hours had ended 3 hours ago. Maya had snuck in through the emergency exit. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect makeup smeared. She showed me her phone screen, keeping the brightness low. Screenshots from the teacher's group chat that her mom, a substitute teacher, had access to. Ms. Taylor was telling everyone I'd had a psychotic break, that I'd attacked myself for attention, that she'd simply been trying to help me with approved therapeutic techniques. I wanted to scream but couldn't risk alerting the nurses. Maya held my hand while I scrolled through the messages. Teacher after teacher expressing sympathy for Ms. Taylor having to deal with such a difficult student. The principal backing her version of events. Even teachers who'd always been kind to me were buying into it. My phone battery showed 3%. I had to make a choice. Show mom the messages now and risk her thinking I was having a mental health crisis, or wait until I was discharged and could think clearly. The sedatives made everything feel like I was underwater. I chose to wait. Maya stayed until a security guard's flashlight swept past the door. She squeezed my hand before slipping back out. I lay in the dark, watching my phone phone battery drain, while Ms. Taylor commented on my mom's Facebook post about the accident. Thinking of you during this difficult time. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Your child is lucky to have such a devoted mother. 2 days later, Maya sent me a Snapchat video. She'd been watching the parking lot after school. The video showed Ms. Taylor walking to her car with a black garbage bag. She placed it carefully in her trunk, looked around, then drove off. The timestamp showed 3:47 p.m., right after dismissal. I texted Maya immediately, begging her to follow Ms. Taylor's car. My desperation made me careless. I didn't think about how suspicious it would look, a student filming a teacher in the parking lot. Maya tried to be subtle, but Ms. Taylor noticed. The last frame of Maya's video showed Ms. Taylor looking directly at the camera, smiling. Ms. Taylor started visiting me in the hospital. She came during Mom's work hours, always bearing gifts, flowers, balloons, a card signed by the entire English department. She'd sit in the visitor's chair and talk to Mom about lesson plans, offering to help me catch up on missed work. Mom ate it up. Here was a teacher who cared enough to visit, who wanted to ensure I didn't fall behind. I watched from my hospital bed, unable to speak up without sounding paranoid. The sedatives they kept giving me for agitation made it hard to form coherent arguments. Ms. Taylor would pat my hand and tell Mom how much potential I had, if only I could learn to manage my condition better. Mom started mentioning how supportive Ms. Taylor was being, how lucky we were to have a teacher who understood mental health challenges, how maybe I'd misunderstood her intentions in class. The manipulation was so smooth, so calculated. I realized this wasn't just about punishing me anymore. This was about controlling the entire narrative. The breakthrough came when I was reviewing my hospital paperwork. The EMT intake form had a section for witness statements. There, in messy handwriting, was a note. Teacher on scene stated she gave student audio therapy to prove they could overcome tics. Student was found with head trauma. Severe tic attack in progress. Teacher seemed proud of technique. The EMT's name was at the bottom. Rodriguez, J. I took a photo with Maya's phone since mine had died. This was the first piece of real evidence that contradicted Ms. Taylor's story, but I needed more. Mom's church friend Janet visited that afternoon. She sat on the edge of my bed while Mom was in the bathroom and lowered her voice. I've heard some concerning things about Ms. Taylor at the last school board meeting. She seems very intense about certain students. My daughter had her last year and transferred out after 2 weeks. Janet was on the school board. This was the first crack in Ms. Taylor's perfect image. I wanted to tell Janet everything, but Mom returned before I could. Still, Janet's eyes met mine with understanding. She knew something was wrong. Dad called that evening. He and Mom had been divorced for 3 years, and he lived 2 states away. His voice was cold, distant. Ms. Taylor had reached out to him, expressing concern about my self-harm and attention-seeking behavior. She'd suggested he might want to consider having me live with him, somewhere with better mental health resources. Dad, who hadn't visited in 6 months, was suddenly an expert on what was best for me. The conversation was short. Dad made it clear he believed the school's version of events. Another adult Ms. Taylor had turned against me. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever. That night, I went through my old emails on Mom's laptop. Buried in my drafts was a message I'd started writing to the school counselor 3 months ago. I'd never sent it, too scared of the consequences. But there it was, dated and time-stamped, describing Ms. Taylor's behavior, how she mocked my tics, how she made me feel worthless. What made my blood run cold was the forwarding information at the bottom. The counselor had forwarded my draft to Ms. Taylor. I'd never sent it, but somehow it had been accessed and shared. The violation of privacy was staggering. Ms. Taylor volunteered to bring my schoolwork home. She'd arrive when Mom was there, always helpful, always concerned. But I noticed how her eyes scanned our apartment, how she asked seemingly innocent questions about our routine, our support system, our finances. She was studying us like specimens. A few days later, my manager from the grocery store where I worked part-time called Mom. They'd received an anonymous complaint about an unstable employee who was a danger to customers. The handwriting on the faxed complaint matched Ms. Taylor's distinctive loops and curves. I lost my job while still in the hospital. The family doctor Mom had taken me to for years suddenly became dismissive. When Mom brought up my anxiety about returning to school, Dr. Harrison barely looked up from his golf magazine. Typical teenage stress, he said. Prescription pad already filled out before he'd even examined me. I later learned he and the principal played golf together every weekend. Desperate for answers, I created a fake Instagram account to monitor Ms. Taylor's daughter, Brittany. She was a senior at a different high school. Her posts were typical teenage stuff, but her stories told a different tale. Complaints about her mom's obsession with certain students. Eye-rolling emojis about another dinner conversation dominated by her mom's problem kids. Then I found it. A video from a week before my incident. Brittany had been recording her cat when her mom's voice carried from the other room. These trigger sounds really work, Ms. Taylor was saying to someone, probably her husband. You should see how they react. It's like pressing buttons. The video was dated exactly 1 week before she'd used those headphones on me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She'd been planning it. 2 classmates reached out privately through Instagram. Sarah from my history class, Marcus from gym. Both had stories about Ms. Taylor's special attention. Sarah had ADH and said Ms. Taylor would deliberately create distracting environments during tests. Marcus had anxiety and described how Ms. Taylor would call on him repeatedly when she knew he was having a panic attack. One mentioned they'd tried recording her once but got caught. The pattern became clear. Ms. Taylor targeted students with invisible disabilities, things that couldn't be seen but could be triggered. She positioned herself as trying to help us overcome our conditions while actually causing harm. It was systematic, calculated. Connor, Ms. Taylor's teaching assistant, quit suddenly. He reached out through Facebook with a simple message. I couldn't watch anymore. When I convinced him to meet me at Starbucks after I was discharged, he looked haunted. He showed me his resignation letter citing ethical concerns and described what he'd witnessed. Ms. Taylor's methods, her conversations about students, her joy when she successfully triggered someone. But Connor was scared. He needed a recommendation letter for graduate school. He couldn't afford to make an enemy of Ms. Taylor. Still, he gave me what he could. Confirmation that I wasn't alone or crazy. The retaliation came swiftly. Connor's girlfriend, also a teacher, let slip in the teacher's lounge that Connor had met with me. By the next day, his promised recommendation letter was suddenly unavailable. Ms. Taylor made sure everyone knew Connor was unreliable and prone to exaggeration. Connor's girlfriend found me after school a week later. She looked around nervously before speaking. Several of us know something's wrong with Taylor, but the principal protects her. She gets results. Her students' test scores are high because she terrorizes anyone who might bring down the average. We're all too scared to speak up. The web was bigger than just Ms. Taylor. It was an entire system designed to protect her while sacrificing students like me. But now I had allies, witnesses, evidence. As I prepared for discharge, I knew the real battle was just beginning. Ms. Taylor had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. She thought my Tourette's made me weak. She was wrong. The discharge papers felt heavy in my hands as Mom drove me home from the hospital. Ms. Taylor had signed up to co-lead Mom's divorce support group that very week. I discovered this when Mom mentioned how thoughtful it was for a teacher to volunteer volunteer her time helping struggling parents. My stomach churned as Mom described Ms. Taylor's presentation about enabling behaviors in parents of troubled teens. She'd used hypothetical examples that matched my medical details exactly. I recognized the gaslighting tactics immediately. My therapist had taught me about psychological abuse patterns during our sessions about dealing with the divorce. Ms. Taylor was systematically turning Mom's support network against us. I started documenting everything in a hidden Google Doc, backing it up to 3 different cloud services and a USB drive I kept in my sock drawer. Ms. Taylor had mentioned during one hospital visit how dangerous false accusations could be for students' futures. The threat was clear. The school janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, approached me during my first day back. He glanced around nervously before mentioning he'd seen Ms. Taylor testing different sound frequencies in an empty classroom weeks before my incident. She told him it was for a science fair project. His weathered face showed genuine concern as he described the strange equipment and how she'd been taking notes while playing various tones. This was premeditated. Mom's best friend Helen became our first real ally. Her son had ADHD, and she recognized the pattern when I shared my documented evidence. Helen's expression hardened as she read through the screenshots and timeline. She started pushing back against Ms. Taylor's narrative in the support group, questioning the convenient timing of her involvement. The school resource officer listened to my story with a blank expression. Without criminal intent, he explained, it was just bad teaching methods. The system wasn't designed to handle this kind of psychological manipulation. I left his office understanding that traditional channels wouldn't help. Maya created a Discord server, and within days, 3 former students had joined. They all had similar stories, similar injuries, similar gaslighting. One had a concussion from hitting her head during a triggered anxiety attack. Another had been hospitalized for exhaustion after Ms. Taylor's encouragement to overcome his ADHD led to dangerous sleep deprivation. The third had transferred schools but still had nightmares. My aunt, a nurse at a different hospital, reviewed my medical records. She noticed a specific pattern of injury consistent with neurologically triggered episodes. The medical evidence was mounting, but we needed more than patterns. We needed proof of intent. Ms. Taylor's former colleague from her previous school reached out through LinkedIn. She'd left after a similar incident, but the family had moved away before anything could be proven. The colleague couldn't say much, bound by professional courtesy, but her careful words painted a clear picture. This wasn't Ms. Taylor's first time. I responded to every provocation with polite, documented emails that I CC'd to the counselor. Ms. Taylor was getting sloppy, her frustration showing. She'd expected me to crumble, not to build a careful case. Her emails became increasingly aggressive, barely maintaining professional language. Mom's insurance company set a deadline for claim resolution. We had 2 weeks to provide additional documentation or accept their initial assessment. The clock was ticking, but involving police still wasn't an option without clearer evidence of criminal intent. Connor's girlfriend, Catherine, overheard Ms. Taylor in the teacher's lounge discussing students who were fakers who need to be broken of their habits. She recorded the conversation on her phone. The language matched exactly with Ms. Taylor's master's thesis, which I'd found in the university library database. Her thesis on behavioral extinction in adolescent neurological disorders read like a handbook for what she'd done to me. Ms. Taylor's daughter posted a TikTok showing her mom crying in the car after a fight. The caption mentioned finding weird sound files on the family computer. The video disappeared within hours, but Maya had screen recorded it. The cracks in Ms. Taylor's perfect facade were showing. When Ms. Taylor offered me private tutoring sessions to help catch up, I declined publicly in the cafeteria where dozens of students could witness. Her face flushed red as I politely explained that I'd arranged alternative support. Other English teachers had started requesting my friends transfer into their classes. The whispers were spreading. Ms. Taylor's influence, I realized, was limited to the principal, 2 school board members, and a handful of parent allies who believed in her tough love approach. The rest were simply afraid or unaware. This knowledge shifted the power dynamic. Through Ms. Taylor's former colleague, I connected with a previous victim's family. During our video call, their son demonstrated the exact same tic patterns triggered by identical sound frequencies. His mother broke down crying as she described their decision to homeschool after the school refused to take action. They documented everything but felt powerless against the system. Maya risked suspension by wearing a Justice for Tourette's shirt to school. Within days, it had become a movement. Students with various disabilities started sharing their own experiences with Ms. Taylor. The administration threatened disciplinary action, but Maya's mom, a member of the local disability advocacy group, pushed back with legal precedents about free speech. Our late-night strategy sessions deepened my friendship with Maya. She'd stay up researching legal cases while I compiled evidence. Her unwavering support kept me grounded when the weight of fighting back felt overwhelming. We developed a system of hand signals to warn vulnerable students when Ms. Taylor was in particularly predatory moods. Despite my rage, I refused to use Ms. Taylor's daughter against her. When Brittany reached out apologetically through Instagram, I simply thanked her for her courage and didn't press for more information. Maintaining moral high ground mattered more than easy victories. The confrontation at the grocery store where I'd gotten my job back happened on a busy Saturday. Ms. Taylor followed me through the aisles, loudly claiming I was harassing her by existing in public spaces. I retreated to the stockroom while she pursued, her voice growing shrill. My manager intervened, and security footage clearly showed Ms. Taylor as the aggressor. Several customers provided witness statements. Multiple witnesses began corroborating my timeline through personal photos and social media posts. A classmate's Instagram story from the day of my injury showed Ms. Taylor carrying the headphones to class. Another student's Snapchat caught her laughing in the hallway afterward. The digital breadcrumbs formed a clear trail. Ms. Taylor's teacher allies started eating lunch elsewhere. The dynamics shifted visibly as more stories emerged. Parents at school pickup exchanged worried whispers. The PTA president's expression changed from supportive to concerned when 3 different families approached her with similar stories about their children. Maya's mom shared my story at the disability advocacy group meeting. Within days, they'd offered support and resources. They connected me with families who'd faced similar situations and lawyers who specialized in educational abuse cases. The network of support grew stronger than Ms. Taylor's web of manipulation. In the library study room, Ms. Taylor cornered me behind glass walls. She leaned in close, her finger jabbing toward my chest as she hissed threats about ruining my future. I remained seated, hands folded calmly on the table. The librarian watched through the glass, as did 2 students studying nearby. My calm response contrasted sharply with her visible agitation. The witnesses exchanged knowing looks. Word spread quickly. Ms. Taylor's mask was slipping in public now. The union representative suggested she take some personal time after multiple complaints reached their desk. She refused, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. The previous victim's mother revealed the final piece of the pattern. Ms. Taylor had used identical methods on her son 2 years ago. Same sound frequencies, same gaslighting, same results. They had recordings of Ms. Taylor discussing her innovative teaching methods with other staff. The evidence evidence was overwhelming. I created a warning network for vulnerable students. We developed subtle hand signals and code words. If Ms. Taylor showed interest in a student with invisible disabilities, they'd be warned. The lunch ladies, bus drivers, and other support staff joined our informal network. They'd seen too much to stay silent any longer. Ms. Taylor's attempts to manipulate my doctors failed when a medical assistant recognized her tactics. She'd tried the same thing with the previous victim. The medical office implemented new policies about verifying identity and relationships before sharing any information. Janet witnessed Ms. Taylor berating a custodian for enabling me by allowing me to use the bathroom during class without a hall pass. Janet's daughter had an anxiety disorder, and watching Ms. Taylor's cruelty toward support staff crystallized her concerns. She began documenting school board discussions about Ms. Taylor's methods. My reputation shifted among classmates. No longer the troubled kid, I became known as someone standing up to abuse. Students I'd never spoken to before offered quiet support in the hallways. Some shared their own stories of Ms. Taylor's psychological games. The EMT who'd written the intake notes agreed to provide a sworn statement. Rodriguez's testimony about Ms. Taylor's exact words during the ambulance arrival would be crucial. He'd been disturbed by her pride in triggering a medical emergency and had documented it carefully. Mom faced a decision as the insurance deadline approached. Pursuing a full investigation meant reliving the trauma and potentially years of legal battles. But accepting the current assessment meant letting Ms. Taylor continue hurting students. The weight of the choice showed in Mom's sleepless nights. During a parent-teacher conference, Ms. Taylor's true nature erupted when parents questioned her methods. She ranted about ungrateful students and enabling parents, her professional mask completely shattered. Several parents recorded the outburst on their phones. The stakes crystallized clearly. This wasn't just about justice for me anymore. It was about protecting future victims. But pursuing this fight might mean sacrificing my own mental health and recovery. The choice felt impossible. I handled Ms. Taylor's increasingly desperate provocations with documented grace. Every interaction was recorded or witnessed. My classmates noticed the change in me, from victim to someone reclaiming power through careful strategy. Ms. Taylor's frustration grew with each failed attempt to trigger me. Key parents began withdrawing support from Ms. Taylor after comparing notes. 3 families discovered their children had similar experiences with triggered medical episodes. The pattern was undeniable to anyone willing to see it. Individual testimonies aligned to create an undeniable pattern. The truth was prevailing despite the system's resistance. Even those who'd initially supported Ms. Taylor couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. Her carefully constructed reputation crumbled piece by piece. Multiple parents formally requested Ms. Taylor be removed from teaching their children. The principal reluctantly agreed to modified duties, but she remained at school daily. The half measure satisfied no one and only increased tensions. Ms. Taylor filed a complaint against me for harassment, using screenshots of my documentation efforts. The complaint backfired spectacularly when my lawyer demonstrated that every single contact had been initiated by Ms. Taylor. Her own evidence proved my case. The administration restricted Ms. Taylor's teaching privileges to non-vulnerable populations, assigning her only to AP seniors. But her presence in the building still terrorized vulnerable students. The survivor support network solidified, creating lasting bonds between those she'd targeted. Unexpected champions emerged from the staff. The football coach shared how Ms. Taylor had tried to convince him I was faking my tics for attention. The drama teacher described Ms. Taylor's attempts to prevent me from participating in activities. Even the strict math teacher defended me, sharing observations of Ms. Taylor's predatory behavior. I presented the full documentation to Mom, who finally understood the scope of Ms. Taylor's campaign. Her hands shook as she read through everything. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and heartbreaking. Mom's guilt over not protecting me earlier transformed into fierce determination. When Mom confronted the principal with the evidence, his defensive reaction revealed complicity. He'd known about Ms. Taylor's methods and chosen to protect her because her students' test scores were high. The corruption went deeper than just one teacher. The full truth emerged through a coordinated presentation of evidence. Connor provided his written testimony detailing Ms. Taylor's systematic targeting methods. The previous victim's family shared their recordings of Ms. Taylor discussing her behavioral extinction techniques with colleagues. Multiple witnesses submitted sworn statements about her pattern of triggering students' disabilities. The documentation painted an undeniable picture of calculated abuse spanning years. The local disability advocacy group included my case in their monthly newsletter, framing it as an example of institutional failure to protect vulnerable students. They carefully avoided naming individuals, but described the pattern of a teacher using students' neurological conditions against them, while administrators looked away. The newsletter reached hundreds of families in our district. I spent 3 nights compiling the final evidence package. Screenshots, medical records, witness statements, video clips, and written testimonies filled a binder 2 inches thick. Maya helped organize everything chronologically, while her mom provided legal formatting guidance. Each piece of evidence was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. The package represented months of careful documentation. Parents began approaching school board members individually during pickup times and community events. These private conversations carried more weight than public complaints. Board members started hearing the same concerns from multiple sources. The pressure built quietly but steadily as more families recognized their children's experiences in the pattern. Ms. Taylor's desperation peaked when she cornered me after school near the bike racks. She held up her phone, showing a drafted email to several college admissions offices. The subject line mentioned concerns about an applicant's character and harassment history. Her threat was clear: continue pursuing complaints and she'd sabotage my college applications. I photographed her phone screen before walking away without responding. The guidance counselor confirmed my fears during our next meeting. Ms. Taylor served on the district's recommendation committee for competitive colleges. Her influence could affect not just my applications, but those of any student who'd supported me. The stakes had escalated beyond justice to my entire future. Some allies began wavering. Parents who'd been vocal started having second thoughts when they realized their own children's college prospects might be affected. Maya's parents discussed pulling her from the advocacy efforts. The support network that had seemed so strong began showing cracks. Fear of retaliation was winning over the desire for justice. Mom suggested we consider dropping the whole matter during dinner one night. She pushed food around her plate while explaining how we couldn't afford to jeopardize my college opportunities. The exhaustion in her voice revealed how much the fight had cost her too. I found myself increasingly isolated as even my strongest supporters urged compromise. I spent a sleepless night weighing my options. Accept Ms. Taylor's silencing and protect my future, or risk everything to prevent her from hurting more students. The choice felt impossible. By morning, I'd made my decision. I contacted the disability rights lawyer the advocacy group had recommended, knowing this meant war. The regularly scheduled school board meeting arrived on a Thursday evening. What should have been routine public comments transformed into an impromptu hearing about Ms. Ms. Taylor. Parents filled every seat while others stood along the walls. Ms. Taylor arrived with her union representative, her expression carefully neutral. The tension in the room felt electric. Ms. Taylor presented herself as an innovative educator being persecuted by a troubled student who couldn't accept help. She spoke eloquently about her years of service and high test scores. Her union rep distributed copies of her teaching awards and positive evaluations. Several parents who didn't know the full story nodded sympathetically. Then the previous victim's mother stood up. She carried a manila folder that she'd kept sealed for 2 years. Inside was documentation of a formal complaint filed at Ms. Taylor's previous school. The complaint had been sealed as part of a settlement, but the family had retained copies. She read portions aloud. Identical patterns, same methods, another student hospitalized. During the meeting, phones throughout the room began buzzing. Ms. Taylor's daughter had posted an emotional TikTok about growing up with a mother who took pride in breaking students. The video showed Brittany in tears, apologizing to all the students her mother had hurt. She described dinner conversations where her mother bragged about making weak students prove their disabilities were real. The board president called for order as the room erupted in shocked murmurs. I stood when recognized, my prepared statement forgotten. Instead, I made a different request. Rather than demanding Ms. Taylor's termination, I asked the board to investigate all disability accommodation failures in the district. This wasn't about punishing one teacher, but fixing a system that enabled abuse. The board voted after 2 hours of testimony. Ms. Taylor would be immediately suspended pending a full investigation. New disability accommodation policies would be implemented district-wide. Mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and preventing disability-based discrimination. Ms. Taylor was escorted from the building by security as the vote concluded. Ms. Taylor attempted one last manipulation, tearfully claiming I'd ruined her career and destroyed her family. The performance might have worked months ago, but when her own daughter stood up and contradicted her, describing years of watching her mother target vulnerable students, even Ms. Taylor's remaining supporters fell silent. The victory felt hollow as I sat in the parking lot afterward, exhaustion weighing down every muscle. Months of hypervigilance and documentation had taken their toll. Mom found me there an hour later, still sitting in the car, too drained to drive home. The fight was won, but the cost was evident in my shaking hands and hollow eyes. Ms. Taylor sent one final text before I blocked her number. You were stronger than I calculated. I filed for a restraining order the next day, ensuring she couldn't contact me or come near school property. The legal protection felt like closing a chapter that had consumed my life. The school implemented real changes over the following weeks. A new disability advocate position was created. Anonymous reporting systems were established. Teachers underwent mandatory training about accommodation requirements. I became an unofficial consultant, helping identify gaps in the system. The hallways felt safer, though the memories lingered. The guidance counselor assured me that the incident wouldn't affect my college recommendations. The advocacy group offered to support my applications with documentation of my leadership in creating positive change. My fight against Ms. Taylor had become an asset, showing resilience and advocacy skills.